Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners and anyone listening online at khbradio.com. Also be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past episodes. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Last week, we had a wonderful conversation with Steelers fullback Franco Harris. He's growing up both Italian and African American, respecting the traditions of both cultures and its famous Italian army. Before we get to our guest tonight, let's find out the answer to last week's trivia question. What is the meaning of non c'è due senza tre? There is no two without three. What does that really mean? That is usually an expression that we use when probably two not so positive events occurred, and the third one is just around the corner. Probably the equivalent of the English, when it rains, it pours. Well, tonight we have a very special guest. New York Times bestselling author and journalist Sara Forden, author of The House of Gucci, a sensational story of murder, menace, glamour, and greed. Gucci, una storia di moda, avidità e crimine. Ma prima, pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at www.istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm very honored to bring to you author and journalist Sara Forden. Forden started her career reporting for the Gaithersburg Gazette, a weekly newspaper in suburban Maryland covering the booming development story along the I-270 corridor outside Washington, D.C. Her decision to pursue a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies took her to Italy, where she ended up living and working for 22 years. She moved to Milan as a business correspondent and covered the explosion of family-owned designer labels, including Giorgio Armani, Gianni Versace, and Prada, into mega brands for publications including the Wall Street Journal, the International Herald Tribune, Women's Wear Daily, and Bloomberg News. Forden is now based in Washington, D.C. with Bloomberg News, where she leads a team of reporters covering corporate influence in the nation's capital and the escalating scrutiny facing giant technology companies such as Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Her book, The House of Gucci, was published in 2000 by HarperCollins and updated in a paperback edition with a new epilogue in 2001 and a new afterword in 2021. The House of Gucci talks about the family saga behind the historic luxury brand and has become a major motion picture directed by Ridley Scott, starring Lady Gaga, Adam Driver, Al Pacino, and Jeremy Irons. Sara, thank you for finding the time in your very busy schedule to talk to us.
Thank you, Viviana. I'm delighted to be here with you and your listeners.
Well, before we dive into the book, I would like to talk about the house of Sara. So the Sara before the book, the young student that went to study to the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Bologna. Were you the first one in the family to study overseas, or were you raised to study foreign languages and study abroad? How was that experience?
Oh, it was really magical, and I was the first one in my family to study overseas. But I had grown up, my father worked for the US government. He was an American diplomat. And so I had grown up living in many different countries between Europe and Latin America. And so when I got to Italy, the first time in 1981 on a college, Eurorail pass trip with the backpack, staying in youth hostels, I fell in love with Italy. And I told myself that I wanted to come back, but not as a tourist. I wanted to have a reason to come back. And then as I went back to college and finished my degree and started working, I completely forgot my promise to myself until 1986, when I landed in Bologna to start my corso intensivo in the August in the summer. And I got off at the train station in Bologna with all my bags, ready for a year. And I heard the sounds of Italian around me and the people talking on the binari. And that's when when that memory came back to me that I had made this promise to myself to come back to Italy with a purpose. And I had completely forgotten it. So it came back in that moment. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm back and I have a reason to be here. I'm here to study, to learn Italian, to understand the Italian culture.
Wonderful. You recently went back to Via Val Meloro. How much has changed and how did it feel?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was for my 35th SICE reunion. So many members of our class came back. And Bologna is in many ways similar, but also many ways brighter and more dynamic. The school has expanded. They after a long search for a new building, they ended up staying in the same building and expanding it. And they worked with the same architect and his son who had designed the original building. So it was a real homecoming.
Wonderful. Once you completed that program, did you return to the US right away, or again, were you able to remain in Italy?
So when I completed the program in Washington, I was back in the US, and I realized that I really wanted to go back to Italy as a foreign correspondent, and that was my dream. And I knew that there was not going to be any major American newspaper or media organization that would just send me to Italy because I wanted to go there. And so I went back and I started to job hunt from there. And I looked in Rome and in Milan, and I realized that my goal was to be a business correspondent. And in Rome, the story was more about Italian politics and about the Vatican, whereas in Milan, there was a real financial and business center. And in fact, Milan was where I ended up getting my first job, which was with Il Sole 24 Ore, which at the time had just signed a contract with Citigroup to start an English language online news service about Italian economics and business news. And they realized they didn't have anybody on staff who had a mother tongue, command of the English language, but also a business and economic vocabulary. So I managed to find out about this opening, and it was just the perfect fit.
So from this opportunity, and again, being a business correspondent, how did you get pulled into the fashion industry, or how was the transition?
It was really very simultaneous in a way. I had started reporting in Milan. I was covering the business and economic scene. And it was just in those years that the Italian fashion industry was starting to take off. And these family-owned labels like Versace, Armani, Ferragamo, Prada were exploding from family businesses into mega brands. And so it became a very big business story. And I was one of the few people who was covering the fashion industry from the business perspective rather than from the fashion perspective.
Mm-hmm. And at what point was there a triggering factor or a moment where you decided that you wanted to write this book? Do you have an epiphany or something that you relate to?
It was kind of a slow moving development in the sense that I had moved from Sole to Dow Jones, where I was covering general business news. And I covered some of the first press conferences, including the first press conference by Maurizio Gucci about how he wanted to relaunch his family label. And I found it fascinating what he was doing. And he was one of the first to bring in an investment bank to buy out his family, shares so that he could control the company. So it was really just the beginning of bringing sort of corporate finance into fashion. And at the same time, as a beat reporter, I had this longing to write a book, but I didn't know what I was going to write the book about. And I knew I wasn't a novelist because I'm a journalist, I deal with facts. But I covered the fashion industry for about 6 years. After that first press conference for Dow Jones, I moved over to Women's Wear Daily, which was the sort of the Bible of the fashion industry in those days. And I covered all the kind of key moments in the Gucci saga. So I covered Maurizio's losing the company, and I covered his murder, and then I covered the arrest of Patrizia, and then I covered the relaunch under Investcorp with Domenico De Sole and Tom Ford, and the debut on the stock market. And so it wasn't until I came back to visit family here in America. I was visiting in Arlington, Virginia, where I live now. And my father wanted me to go see the new public library because we're a family who loves books and loves reading. He said, "Oh, you've got to come see the new Quincy Library." So I went in, and then this is dating myself, but in the research department, the old card catalog had been moved over to the side and was against the wall, with all the sort of worn cards of all the books. And in the middle of the research department, there was a computer. So I thought, well, let's see what this computer can do. And I went up and I typed in 4 letters, well, Gucci, 5 letters, and Gucci, and it spit out, in those days, Google still spit out the 10 blue links. And of those 10 blue links, 8 of the stories were stories I had written. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a book. This is something I know something about.
Well, we're so thankful that that someone had moved that cart. So obviously the Gucci story, it's a story filled with glamour, intrigue, and you have the rise, the near fall, the subsequent resurgence of this major fashion powerhouse. So you have a high fashion, high finance, a heart trending personal tragedy. Can you tell us a little bit about, the book spans over 3 generations. In your opinion, these generations did the same thing, or do you find a difference between first generation, second generation, and third generation usually?
Well, the saying was in the Italian family business, the first generation creates, the second generation expands, and the third generation destroys. And that almost happened in the Gucci story, because Guccio Gucci was the creator, the founder who had the vision to make quality leather goods products in his native Florence that he could sell to foreign tourists and also to the European traveling elite. His son Aldo was the real expander, and he had a marketing sense before marketing even existed. And he was the one who came up with the idea of the Gucci's being saddlers to nobility, which was a complete fabrication, but it really supported all of the GG, the horse bit, the GG logo, the red and green stripe, which was symbolized the girth strap that went under the saddles of the horses, saddle blankets of the horses. And then Maurizio and his 3 cousins, who were always sort of in conflict over how the business should be run. And so the company became, to the brink of bankruptcy before Maurizio lost control of it. So it was really a real sort of up and down, and then up again story. And that was really what prompted me to write the book, because in the early days, it was so tragic. Early days of my covering the story, and Maurizio had lost the company, and then he's murdered, and then his ex-wife is arrested. It was obviously almost like a Greek tragedy. Mm-hmm. But when the company took off again, I thought, it's important to really cement the legacy of what the family had created, and then show how outsiders, Tom Ford and Domenico De Sole, were able to build on that and make it a great, successful brand again.
The book is extremely detailed, and also the ties between the family members and everything. How did you go about your research, and how was that process for you? How long did it take you eventually to write a book? I'm sure a lot of the material you had, your first hand was maybe the material you had already covered, but I'm sure there are some archives and other pieces that went into building such a detailed reconstruction.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot to do, and it took me 2 years all together. It was about 18 months of reporting, researching, writing, and then the last 6 months was doing the copy edits on the manuscript. And I had a lot of the information about the period that I had covered, so from say 93 to 98. But what I really needed to do was I needed to go back and research the origin story and the history, and get the people to talk to me. So I I was able to get two of the cousins, Giorgio and Roberto, to talk with me. Obviously, at that point, Maurizio was gone. Patrizia was in jail. They wouldn't let me talk to her. You know, the founders were gone. But there were many people, and this was as an Italian family company, there were many people who had worked with the company over the years. Some of them were still there, who knew the family, and others who had left, but obviously had very strong memories. And so it was almost like they were family themselves too. And so they were able to share with me their stories. So I was able to reconstruct a lot of the history. And then while I was writing the book, two key stories took off really under my feet. And one was the takeover battle between Bernard Arnault and François Pinault. So that was happening kind of in real time while I was writing. And then the second thing that happened was the trial. So for 5 months, from I think it was May to November, the trial was going on, and I was in the courtroom. They were meeting 3 days a week, and I wanted to be in the courtroom every moment because I wanted to be able to capture the scenes and the expressions and the words. And so there was a lot to do. I mean, it wasn't like I was sort of twiddling my thumbs and relaxing in the evenings.
Absolutely. And I believe also when you went back to Italy recently, you visited the archives that just reopened in Via delle Caldaie. Can you tell us, for us who haven't had the luxury to visit the archives, what do they contain?
Oh, it was really quite a moving experience, and they've worked very hard over the years to reconstruct and reclaim a lot of the products. I mean, one of the first pieces that I saw when I walked in the first room was a little sort of valigetta, a little suitcase, kind of like a square, almost like a little trunk. And it had the original Gucci fabric that was the precursor to the GG logo. Mm-hmm. And it was a sort of a hemp, you know, kind of a straw colored background with a brown pattern with little diamonds, intersecting diamonds. And so that was before they came up with the idea of the GG logo, but it was also a way to identify their products. So this is very early days in the luxury market. And one of the sort of ingenious things about this fabric was that it was continuously repeating. So any way you laid out the fabric, you could make it seamless. So it was also very cost efficient. So you weren't throwing away, you know, meters of fabric.
Wonderful. Well, when we think about high fashion, we definitely don't think about a murder case. What was the reaction? Not only people, or not just in the fashion industry, but you were, yes, what was the reaction to it?
It was shocking. I mean, in a word, it was absolutely shocking. And first of all, we have to remember this was in Milan in the 80s. Milan was not a city where there were shooting deaths. You know, it was not a common or frequent thing. It was really out of the ordinary. It was right downtown. It was a, you know, beautiful, prestigious palazzo. He was a well-known name, but at that point he was kind of had disappeared from the public view because he'd lost control of the company by then. He was trying to start over. He had, you know, $150 million in the bank, and he was evaluating other companies to invest in. But there was nothing really controversial at that point about what he was doing. And so it was shocking, and it was perplexing because nobody could really understand who could have done such a thing.
Mm-hmm. Was the family still involved in associated with the brand, or was it now separate?
No, the family was completely separate, and it was being run. It was owned by Investcorp, an investment bank, and it was being run by outside managers, Tom Ford and Domenico De Sole. So they had been with the company, so they knew it well, but they weren't connected with the family in any way.
Mm-hmm. Well, should we give a spoiler or not? Mm-hmm. Let's say that when finally the investigation caught up with Patrizia's guilty verdict through the phone conversations, let's just say it was a very clever way of communicating to Pina. Very pertinent to the business, and I think we should leave it up there, and people will have to
You're a very close reader. Yeah, that was a great detail. And you know, one of the questions was why didn't the magistrato Carlo Nocerino figure it out? I mean, it was clear that the sort of the spurned wife, ex-wife, could have had a motive, but they were wiretapping, you know, her phones. They were listening, and they were speaking. The phone conversations were in code, so the investigators didn't know what was being said.
Do you think that there are some lessons to be learned out of this, the Gucci story?
Oh yes, I think this is really an epic story. This is like Shakespeare, or as I said, a Greek tragedy. I mean, I think it's about family. It's about trying to understand each other and get along, and not let greed or interest divide you. It's about love.
Hmm.
It's about money. You know, I mean, you know, Patrizia's famous expression was, "It's better to be weeping in a Rolls Royce than happy on the backseat of a bicycle." Well, is that really true?
Yeah.
I wonder now if she would see
Real.
that differently.
Mhm. Yes, and from obviously the perspective of us consumers, we do believe that Gucci has indeed managed to overcome this past and is still one of the top brands that um, indeed everyone aims to have a piece of Gucci. And actually, I do have a little question. I believe the props from the film are getting auctioned off. Is there a prop that you or something that you would like to that you would dive to have? No pun intended.
Well, I should say that first of all, I would invite your listeners to follow my Instagram at Sergey Forden, on my website, sergeyforden.com, because I'm constantly updating this story. And I am going to be doing an interview with Jonty Yates, who was the costume designer for Ridley Scott in the movie. And one of my favorite pieces, I'm not sure that I need to have it, but I just love it because it's so iconic, is the Gigi tunic that Patrizia, Lady Gaga as Patrizia, is wearing in the scenes in New York, with the leather, the little leather neckline. And I saw that piece in Milan when I went back last September, and they did an exhibit in Milan of the sort of iconic pieces from the Gucci archive, and it was there. So I have some photos of that on my Instagram, and I think that's what, like, that just says a lot about sort of the Gucci
and
style of the
and
70s.
this interview is going to be on the 25th on your Instagram account.
Yes.
Wonderful. We'll make sure to link up, and I will definitely be one of those. I saw the post and I put on my calendar right away. Now let's switch a little bit to the movie. So they say that Rome was not built in a day, nor was the movie. So why did it take so long eventually from to be turned into a motion picture? And as you were writing the book, were you already visualizing that a movie could come out of the story?
You know, they say these things take time, and it's really a matter of getting the right talent together. And so, you know, in my case, it took over 20 years. But I always believed in my heart that this story could and should become a movie. And when I was writing it, I mean, it's such a dramatic story. I could see scenes on the big screen, and some of the chapters I wrote, you know, with the idea of seeing it on the screen. Um, at the same time, I think one of the first things that happened after I wrote the book was Martin Scorsese came out in an interview, and I believe it was Variety, which is the sort of the Bible of Hollywood, and he said he wanted to do a Gucci movie. So of course nobody was going to challenge Scorsese. What a master he is! But he didn't want my book. He had already bought the rights to an older book. So that really killed the market for my book. And then he never made the Gucci movie. And so after some years passed, Ridley Scott said that he wanted to do a Gucci movie. And eventually he did option my book as one of his resources. And it took some time. They went through different screenplay writers. But in, I believe it was 2018, they decided to give the project to a very talented young Italian writer named Roberto Bentivegna. And they asked me if I would work with him. And I said, sure. And so we started having phone conversations, and then we met also in person. And Roberto not only grew up in Milano as a kid and went into like Italian British school there. His mother worked for Armani for 30 years. So he completely knew the sort of Milano da bere of those years and what the fashion industry represented to the city.
Wonderful. Now, if I remember correctly, the opening scene of Maurizio on the bicycle, and I'm from Rome, what I see is the Quartiere Coppede. And then also I was in Rome when they were still shooting, because I remember my nephew who lives in the Talenti area saying that he had seen the trucks and Lady Gaga and so forth. So I guess a lot of the filming has taking place in Rome. Do you know why there was, I mean, obviously we have Cinecittà, but I didn't see any Cinecittà studios. I really saw the streets of Rome. Do you know anything about why there is?
Yeah, actually, I think it does have to do, I mean, obviously I wasn't involved in the production decisions, but I think it does have to do a lot with the Cinecittà infrastructure in Rome. And they really, they really know how to make movies. And so my sense is that it was much more efficient and smooth to shoot some of the scenes in Rome than in Milan, although a lot of the scenes were also shot in Milan.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about a recent event that you attended it was a gala in Washington, D.C., the Beyond the Runway. And so there was also Domenico Del Sol that had a very nice conversation with you. Can you tell us a little bit how the event unfolded?
Oh, yeah, you've done so much great research. I'm so impressed. So when I moved back to Washington in 2010, I really missed Italy and Italian life and culture. And so I found, after a few years, I found the Italian Cultural Society, which is a school. First and foremost, it's a language school. And then it also has monthly activities to promote Italian language and culture. And so I joined the board in 2017. And I help them with events, and the big sort of annual fundraising event to support the school and the fundraising and the cultural programs is an annual gala. And so I proposed to them that we invite Domenico De Sole, who was the CEO of Gucci, first the CEO, the president of Gucci America, and then the CEO of the Gucci Group global business. And so I thought, it would be really wonderful, since he was Italian from Reggio Calabria, but his professional career really started in the United States and started in Washington. He went to Harvard and became a tax lawyer in Washington, D.C., and then eventually ended up working for the Gucci family and then the Gucci company. So I thought it would be a beautiful sort of example of this sort of value of the relationship also between Italy and the United States, to talk to him about his career and how he did what he did.
Wonderful. Another tandem interview that I saw that I really, really enjoyed was yourself with Beppe Severnini, which I would love to have him on the radio program. And so that was fantastic. I almost said duet, because it was reading from the book, and you were also translating, interpreting for the audience. And I have we're towards the end of our conversation. I have very quick questions for you. What is your favorite place in Italy, if you could pick one?
Oh, wow. Well, that's really hard because there's so many beautiful, beautiful places. But I think one of my favorite places in Italy, I have to say, is Cortina d'Ampezzo. But not the sort of jet set Cortina that it's become, but the Cortina of the mountains and the hikes and the rifugi, and just the beautiful scenery there.
Another one, favorite food, or maybe a food that you feel that you can only get in Italy?
You know, I thought about that as we went back to Bologna for our reunion, and they were all focused on, you know, what restaurants to go to for our class dinners. And I thought, you know, it's really the standouts of Italian food are really the simple quality products. So a fresh mozzarella, a fresh prosciutto, a fresh piece of bread. It's really the simple things I think that you miss and you crave.
And the very last question, you had an article, How to Spend a Perfect Day in DC. How would you spend a perfect day in Milan?
Oh, wow, that's a great one. Well, I just did that very recently, and I catch the tram from my old neighborhood in Piazza Napoli. You know, I love the ding, ding, ding of the tram, the clanging. And I go down and I have a cappuccino and a brioche at Cookie, which is a lovely bar, you know, in Corso Genova. And then I go down to the Duomo and I walk around and I like do a little window shopping. And then maybe I go up and see there's now a High Line kind of situation in Milan over the, like near the Rinascente, where you can see all the rooftops and the mountainsides. But then there's the new neighborhoods in Milan that didn't even exist when I was there, like the Piazza Gaiolenti with the fountains there and the skyscrapers. I always like to go by Corso Como at 10 and check in and see what's going on in the shop there. And right next to that in Corso Como is the Italy. So again, I'm very food oriented. I should say something about the museums too. I mean, obviously there's the Palazzo Reale, which usually has a good exhibit. Some of the private museums. I think it's Bagatti Valsecchi. So there's the Scala Museum is very special.
Yes, so don't be surprised if in a couple of weeks you might see some posts on my account with these suggestions, because I'm heading there next Friday. So it will be a perfect itinerary to explore.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll be living through you vicariously.
Well, I thank you very much for your time. Your time is very precious, and again, I'm very honored that you spent this a half hour with us, and we'll be following you, and also on the 25th, as you are indeed doing your interview with Miss Yates. Thank you very much, Sara.
Fantastic. You're a fantastic interview. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your interest.
Thank you.